So these are the three basic tips that I have to remember when I'm working with my students as a librarian as opposed to being an instructor. The tone and the terminology that's going to be used is going to be a lot more casual, and that's on purpose. Most of the library terms, such as reference, students just don't connect with anymore. So that's when we have to be careful of the terminology. I wish students would connect with the word reference, but most libraries are going with ask us or just plain question marks now. So it's really important to remember that the students aren't always going to be thinking the same thing about the same words that we're thinking about. And then again, there's the interest level. Remember, our students are probably not going to become scholars in the specific fields that we're teaching in. So therefore, quite frankly, they're not going to be very interested in what is the proper way of doing things. Most of the time, they just want to make sure they're going to get a good grade. A good example of this is an English 121 course that's made up of primarily computer science majors. They're going to have a lot different priorities when it comes to what they're interested in and what they want to learn about, as opposed to an English 121 course that was made up of a bunch of literature majors. So basically what it comes down to is know your audience. Just remember that they might not be as interested as we are in what we're talking about. So I've got a couple of tools here, and I promise you none of them is the Purdue OWL, that I think would be helpful for you when you're talking to your students who might be struggling with some of your citation requests in their assignments, annotated bibliographies, works cited pages, proper in-text citations, and all of those. Purdue OWL is great, but I think it's a little overwhelming to our students sometimes. There's so much information that unless you send them a specific link, I think it's going to overwhelm them, and I think it often does. So this is one of my favorite tools. It's called NoodleTools. NoodleTools is a citation creation and research organization tool that was created by a librarian, and that's why I love it so much. They put so much effort into making this a great tool that teaches as well as just gives the student the ability to knock out a citation. It's a tool that I'm exploring for us here at CCCO, and so later on I'm going to ask your opinion about how you think it's going to work and if you'd be willing to use it. The best part about NoodleTools is that they realized that not everyone can have a subscription, and so they created a free aspect of it called NoodleTools Express. So basically, it doesn't store your work for you. You can't come back to it at a later time. You can't make note cards. But what you can do is you can select from 3 of the most common citation styles, and you can enter in all the information so that the student can actually create and generate a good citation. The part about it that I like the most, I think, is in the upper right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a little bubble that says MLA Guide. Now, I've expanded it here, but for any type of article, website, image, video, etc., that the student would select that they'd like to cite, it actually generates the citation up on the top, the format of the citation, I'm sorry. So when the student selects a journal from a database, that will actually change, and it'll include the name of the database, web, etc. If you were to actually select the print version, that would go away. So it's really nice for the students who are really confused about what does it mean when something comes from a database. Well, this one I actually got from a counter somewhere. I think it's really important that they see the formatting guide as well as walk through the steps of actually creating the citation. My favorite part about the subscription version of this tool is the fact that you can actually generate your entire citation page and your assignment, your full written paper, in Google Docs, and then share it directly with either a group or an instructor. The next tool that I think is very useful is the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Citation Builder. This is something that they've created based off of the MLA Handbook for Writers of Research Papers, the 7th edition, as well as the 6th edition of the Manual of APA and the Chicago Manual of Style. You have the choice on the right-hand side. It's a lot more simple, where you can, or I'm sorry, on the left-hand side, where you can actually go through and select what it is you're citing, and then it brings you through the same type of process. Now, the reason why I like these two tools so much better than EasyBib or Son of a Citation Machine or pretty much any other generator out there is the fact that these were created by librarians. NoodleTools was started by a librarian at a college, and she actually branched off and started her own company. This one here was created by the librarians at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which has a great MLIS program. So I find that these tools are maybe a little bit more reputable. There's no ads. There's no selling features. You don't have to buy the APA version. Our students obviously still have to generate their own. They have to write in all the information correctly, and they've got to double check it. But this way, it kind of gives them a starting point. I know that these citation generators, though, are kind of a hot topic when it comes to certain instructors. So if this is something you think you'd like your students to use, I strongly encourage you to do so. If you prefer your students to learn to write citations from scratch by themselves, then that's absolutely great too, and there are other tools that can help them with that. The last tool that I wanted to show you was the Portland State Writing Center. They actually have a guided tour that I think is phenomenal, and I know that since we don't exactly have a writing center here at CCCO, a lot of those writing questions come to you as the instructor or come to me as the librarian. Eventually, we generally have to refer them back to their home college, and that might not be very convenient for a student who's specifically taking online classes. So this writing center is pretty wonderful. It walks them through 10 steps that go from understanding an assignment, how to use sources, how to locate sources, how to write a thesis statement, etc. And my favorite part here is the fact that it says under each one of these, consider this and this, but it gives you some steps, and then it tells the student for more info, and they click. It doesn't take them out to a different page. All it does is scroll down the page and actually show you a number of different, more resources for each of those steps. So I switched over to step 9, which is checking your use of research. And it basically walks through, there's steps here. My paper uses quotes, paraphrases, and summaries effectively, and no more than 1/3 quotes. Well, I wasn't really sure what that meant, maybe. I'm not really familiar with the term paraphrase. So when I clicked more info, it actually took me down and showed me original passage, a bad paraphrase, and a good paraphrase. And it gave me some definitions and things like that. So it's a really great tool for the student who's kind of struggling with maybe a specific step or quite possibly even the entire writing process. All right, so we're going to move on to some of these frequently asked questions and answers from students. But before I do, are there any questions about any of those tools or about myself that you'd like before we move on? Okay. So we're going to switch gears here, and these are the student questions. These questions are all taken from either actual conversations that I've had with students, emails that I've had from students, questions that have been entered into the library FAQ here. You'll notice with a lot of these questions and answers that my tone is really casual. I'm trying really hard not to intimidate the students with the answers that I'm giving, and it's worked really well. I've had a lot of students come back and ask more questions, or even the students who come back and say, I still have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain it further? That's something that I struggle with in the class that I'm teaching. I noticed that some of my students will ask a question first. They'll say they understand it, but when they turn in their assignment, I realize that they really did not understand it. So the first question that often gets asked by students is, how in the world do I know what style to use? Now there's 3 basic steps here. The first is to check your assignment. Most of the time the assignment or the syllabus will have the style expected listed. If it's not, you need to check with your instructor. Your instructor will always tell you what style they're preferring on their assignments. And if it's too late and you've procrastinated and you're not comfortable asking your instructor what type of style they wanted you to use, there are some basic guidelines. If you're using MLA, You probably will be in the history, or in English, maybe some of the humanities, APA for social sciences, business, and Chicago or Caribbean with history. There are always those students, I know we're all very well aware of them, who wait until the last second. And I see Lisa asked a question, can you email us this presentation so we can have the websites you just discussed? Absolutely, Lisa. And actually, this portion of the presentation is designed for really student use as opposed to instructor use. So I will make these slides available, and you can edit them and send them out to your students, put them in a discussion board, post them as an announcement. If you realize with some of your writing assignments your students are struggling and kind of asking those same questions over and over, this middle section is written for those students. So hopefully you'll find that helpful too. So one of my favorite questions and one of the hardest questions to answer is, why should I use the proper style? I have a lot of students who say, I understand that I am supposed to use MLA, and I will use MLA, but I don't actually understand why I have to use MLA. Basically, the answer to this question is that different citation styles have developed over time to address the needs of different disciplines. The disciplines vary wildly, so the idea is that the citation styles need to conform to what's expected and respected by those scholars. They might be very, very similar, but if you think about it like this, if you head to a different country, you might be able to speak a little bit of that language. You can probably get by with just a little bit of confusion on both your part and the part of the person that you're trying to communicate with. But you need a translator or a dictionary to really communicate effectively, to make sure you're using the right words in the right order, so that the person you're talking to can actually understand you. Likewise, with the different citation styles, they ensure that you're using the right words in the right order. And this is going to help you, your reader, decipher the code of your source list. And that's really what it all comes down to, is that your reader can actually understand what you wrote down and why you wrote it that way. Unfortunately, sometimes the answer for this question is because I said so, because sometimes that still does not click for some students. I have one student that I think I tried 5 or 6 different stories and trying to explain why MLA style was what we were using, and eventually she said that she didn't care anymore, which was kind of disheartening, but that's sometimes what happens. Another great question is why we should even use citations. Using citation gives the credit to your source of information and ideas. Anything that you don't credit needs to come from you. It allows your reader to locate the resources used and they can follow up with it later. Just like in Wikipedia or websites, we all click through, and sometimes we fall down a rabbit hole of clicking through 5, 6, 7 links on a page, and we end up on something we had no idea that we were on. Kind of like YouTube sometimes. You know, you start with one thing and you end up watching videos that you have no interest in, but you kind of click through to them. That's why we need to have the resources, because maybe your reader is interested about something and they need to be able to go find it. And then they need to go find something else and something else and something else. For your instructors, basically, if you use citations, it's providing evidence that you actually did the research you were supposed to do. And it makes sure that you avoid unintentional plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is like the holy grail aha moment for most students. They don't actually care about the rest of this, but they realize that if they use citations, that they're not going to be caught plagiarizing or they're not going to be accused of plagiarizing. All of a sudden, they think that citations are the best thing ever. Because when they realize the repercussions of those plagiarism claims, you know, redoing a paper, 0 credit, being dropped from a class, you know, being expelled from the university, et cetera, all of a sudden it becomes pretty real, and using citations is a great way to avoid that. One of the most common questions is, how should I incorporate sources? Now, there are 3 different ways that you can incorporate the sources that you found when you're doing research: quotes, paraphrases, and summaries. Using these three things offers you basically three important advantages in your assignment. You get the support and credibility of an author of published scholarly work that you can interweave into your own words and help support your ideas. It also allows you to showcase a viewpoint that's different from your own, but have it work in a manageable way. You can find the counterpoint of what your argument is and then put that in there, but as long as you're using the quotes and the paraphrases, you're letting your reader know that it's not actually coming from you, that you still believe your first idea, if you will. And using quotes allows you to provide emphasis on certain terminology, maybe certain ideas from using those authors' own words. A well-written paper should have quotes, paraphrases, and summaries intermixed with your own words. You should have no more than 1/3 of your paper should be a quote, a paraphrase, and a summary. The rest of it needs to be your analysis. And that makes sure that your paper is still in your own voice, which is something that you're probably going to get graded on. Another great question is, how often can I quote? It seems like a lot of the time students are either a little quote happy, where their entire paper is quote butted up to quote, put it up to quote, or they are afraid to use a quote because they're afraid they're going to be plagiarizing. So quotes should be used sparingly. A quote is the direct words of the author. A quote should be concise. You shouldn't quote an entire passage or 3 sentences unless you can't figure out a way to make those your own words. So try to make it as concise as possible. And a great rule of thumb for how often you should quote is that you should quote, for every quote that you're using, you should have 2 lines of analysis. And that means you're not going to have too many quotes, and you're going to still have enough of your own words and your own voice in your assignment so that way it still sounds like you. Now this would be really helpful for assignments if we said you can only have 5 direct quotes or something like that, but we all know that's not realistic because even if we tried to do that for our own writing, it wouldn't actually happen. Now paraphrasing is something that often confuses students because they think that if they've rephrased the ideas in their own words, then all of a sudden it's their own ideas, but it's not. So this is an example of good paraphrasing from, did you say that you teach 30% of an essay can be source material? I always thought it should be 10%, 90% ratio of source original thought. It depends on everyone. 30% is a very rough estimation for the student who wants that concrete number, and that most instructors through most fields would be okay if 30% of their essay was source material as opposed to original thought. If that's not the case for your classes, that's great, because I agree that 10%, 90% is even better, but it's just kind of a general rule of thumb, if you will. One of my favorite things to do is actually gather assignments from instructors and keep them in a file so that way when a student comes to me, I can actually look up that course, find the assignment, and then tell the student exactly what their assignment is asking them for. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often, or as often as I would like it to be. So, 10%, 90% is excellent, but that 30% is just kind of a generic rule. Does that help that? Okay. When it comes back to paraphrasing, it's important to realize that changing just a few words is not sufficient. A lot of the times students will change, one word, for example, with these examples on the screen here. Instead of guarantee, it would say a promise. And that's still plagiarizing if you're doing something like that. You have to change the entire idea into your own words. And it's also important to remember that even though you change it into your own words, it is not your own thought, so you still have to cite it. When do I need to cite? Citations are necessary pretty much all of the time. Citations are necessary whenever you refer to someone else's work or ideas, whenever you're using direct quotes paraphrasing, or summarizing. The only time that you really don't need to cite is when you're using something that was common knowledge, but even that, depending on who your reader is, could be up for debate. So it's always better to find a source, to cite your source, so that way you don't have to worry about something being common knowledge to you but not to your reader. For example, if you're writing an assignment on, exercise and the benefits of exercise, the person who's writing the paper might be a, physical therapy student or personal trainer on the side, and they might be really an expert when it comes to what they're writing about, but the reader might not be. So you have to assume that your reader might not know everything that you're talking about, and that it might not be a common knowledge to your reader. So it's always important to cite. There are some exceptions to that rule, of course, but generally speaking, you should always cite. This is one of the questions that causes a lot of students a lot of anxiety. What if I don't know X, Y, or Z that needs to be included in my citation? Now that usually happens with websites. Students can't find the author. Students can't find the last date, the date it was updated. They can't find a publisher, something like that. So there are 3 important steps that I always tell them to take. The first is to double check the source. Make sure that you actually can't find what you're looking for. It's always helpful if you can put something down, come back to it later, maybe ask a friend, a family member, a librarian to see if they can find the author for your website or for your source. If you can't find that piece of information easily, it's really important to go back and determine whether or not that source is actually credible. Now, a great way to do that is to use the CRAFT test, which evaluates the currency, relevancy, authority, and the purpose of the source. If you've determined that your source is credible, then you're only left with one option, and that is to create your citation using the information available to you. That might mean that you don't have an author listed, or you don't have a date listed, or you don't have a title listed. But if you've had someone else double check that, and you've determined that your source is credible and it is something that you need to use, you can't make up information. You just have to leave it out. Now, if you're not familiar with the CRAFT test, here is an example of the CRAFT test. There's many different versions of this out here. This one has 2 A's because it has the authority of the author and the authority of the organization. I've used this tool with my classes on information literacy for evaluating websites, and a lot of my students, first of all, they find it extremely entertaining because of the name. And so the answers I get from my assignments are quite funny, and the students take full advantage of the ability to write crap in an assignment and have it actually make sense. And so they constantly write, well, I think this website is full of crap, and I think this website is, this, that, and the other. I do have this available as a handout. I have a couple of different versions of it, and I can make all of those available. The versions, this one has a scale, so the students can actually go through and rate the website, and if it scores at a certain point total, you'll see that, yes, this one is something I should use. The other ones are more just kind of like questions, more of a verbal exercise that they can kind of go through and look at it, but I'm happy to send it out. The students find it extremely entertaining. I think it appeals to the kid in all of us because of the name, and I think that's why it's so effective. So another great question is, how can I actually get help? And I think that's where a lot of the students struggle. They don't know who can help them, and they don't know who's available, when they're available, and I think that causes some anxiety for our students. So these are the options when it comes to getting help. They can come to me. I'm happy to help via email. I have sent some quick Jing videos to a student. I have actually talked to a student online on the phone because we weren't quite connecting. All of those things I can do with anyone. We also have online tutoring available. Students, you can go to your home college library. My favorite is the Home College Writing Center because I think that a lot of these questions here, librarians can answer and librarians can help with them, but I think that students always wanted to go just one step further. They want the answer to their questions, but they also want someone to show them how it's done. And most librarians do not actually do work on the assignments with the students. And that's because it comes back to them when it comes to the grading and turning in If I were to tell a student, hey, yeah, this source is great, you should use it, it's a great source because it fits your topic perfectly. If, as the instructor, you don't agree with that, the student is going to come back and say, well, the librarian said so. And at that point, then there's, it's kind of an argument, and we're trying to raise independent students here, right? So we'd like our students to be able to make decisions for themselves about those kinds of resources, or how to incorporate it, or if it's a good quote. And so those writing centers are extremely important. And then the last place that the students can get help is from the instructors. I know that we all don't have a whole lot of time, so that's why some of these three middle center options here, tutoring, home college library, and home college writing center, are great resources to direct the students to. I do have a list of all of the home college libraries and the home college writing centers, the contact information for all of those, if you'd like that, and that would be helpful for you to kind of send out to your students, when you have a big writing assignment or you're starting a writing assignment, let me know. I'm happy to send that out with the rest of this information. So here are some things that are coming up for the library that are going to have a direct effect on the help that I can give your students with citations and any other library material questions they have also, but specifically with citations. The one that I'm most excited about is actually a knowledge base or a lore that's going to focus one on MLA, one on APA, and there is one also on Chicago. And basically, these are going to be pick and plug modules that you'll have access to and you can grab and stick inside your course wherever they're needed. They're going to have videos, tutorials, quick handout guides, because sometimes the student just wants the answer. And there's also some active learning activities, that craft test, for example. Take this craft test, go through a website, figure out whether or not you think it's applicable. I know that in some cases it's a little difficult to get our students to do these types of activities. Watch a tutorial, watch a video, complete an active learning activity, because we can't always assign points to them. But if you can figure out a way to do that, perhaps with a discussion, add as an extra discussion question for that week, watch this tutorial and write your thoughts on it, I think it's going to be very helpful for students. I had hoped to have the videos and the tutorials available today to show you, but they're not far enough along where I'm comfortable showing them out yet. Hopefully right after the new year, I will have at least the MLA style videos and at least a handful of them done enough so that way you can insert them into your courses. They're all going to live off of a LibGuide, so that way you can go through, grab anything you want to, and insert it in. This is something I'm so excited about. This is called a library DIY, or basically a self-quiz. It's from Portland State University. As you can tell, I'm a very big fan of all of their work. I recommended it quite a bit today. So this is actually a DIY self-quiz that the students can take themselves on. The link is at the bottom, but I can send it out. Oh, Allison. Yes, the tutorials will absolutely include academic integrity. The lures will have a section on academic integrity, but I will be including that in almost every single tutorial or video, because I think it's important to, I don't want to overdo it, but I think it's important that our students realize that academic integrity comes into play in every single aspect of their interactions with school, basically. When they find resources, they have to find the proper ones. When they use those resources, etc. If you think it would be helpful, I can also add to my list to create just a video on academic integrity. That's on the list, but if you think it's something that would be really useful, I can kind of bump up the priority level of that and get it done sooner rather than, when it comes up on the list. Just let me know. Oh, the web address. Let's see. Okay, great, Allison. Judy, can you see the web address now? It's at the very bottom of the screen. If not, the web address is library.pdx.edu/DIY. So this basically works. The student gets to sit here on the home page and they look and they say, okay, what do I need help with? Now, the reason why this is so exciting to me is when I was back in a traditional community college, we had a chat service. And I cannot tell you how many times the students were actually afraid to come up to the reference desk and ask us a question. So we would get a chat saying, hey, I need this book, is it available? And whoever would get the chat would get up, go walk over, find the book, bring it over to the reference desk, type back and say, yes, it's available, would you like to come pick it up? And the student would say, oh, I'm at computer 14, I'll be right there. And they'd come up and grab it. And that happened so many times. The students just didn't want to interact with us in person, but they had no problem asking our questions online. And that's where this comes into play. Granted, right now, they don't really have the ability to come up to me and talk to me in person, but I still think that this is going to be very helpful for all of you when it comes time to having those student questions that they want answered right then and there. So let's say, I'm a student here and I'm trying to figure out exactly what kind of sources I need for my research. I would just click on this card, and the next window pops up, and it says, well, what type of sources do you need? And it has every type of source or any kind of somewhat related question that you could think of. I'm looking for articles, books, journal articles, statistics, primary sources. I don't know how to search. I need items in a different language. I mean, I think there's something like 25 different questions here that the student has to pick from then. And then, let's say I wanted peer-reviewed articles. This is kind of the answer for that question. It goes through different strategies on how to find peer-reviewed articles. It shows them videos, it gives them extra information, and it also shows them related answers to questions. So the one that I ended up following through was, I want peer-reviewed articles. You see on the left-hand side it says, the related DIYs are checking to see if an article is peer-reviewed. Most students don't know how to do that. So they might realize, hey, I don't actually know what a peer-reviewed article is, and then they'll click on that. So it might help answer a question that they didn't even know they had. Now the reason why I think this is so awesome is because the librarians who created it have made it open source. So they have made it open source, so it's available for anyone to use. So I have gone through and kind of created my own DIY step-by-step questions and answers, and hopefully we'll have it up soon. I really don't have a timeline for that though, but I think it'll be really helpful. And this too is something that can be put right in your course. You can send it out as a discussion, response if a student is struggling with something. You can shoot them an email and say, hey, I realized on your assignment you were having some issues with this. Try try checking out this library DIY and see if you can get your questions answered. I see that I actually have a question here that was hidden. Oh, okay. All right, so basically now it's your turn. I would love to bounce ideas off of each other. If you have had a citation issue with students and you couldn't figure out how to get it across, if you've had a great solution that you'd like to share, if someone in your discipline is here and might be able to offer you some tips on something that's worked with them. If you'd like to type in your questions or anything like that, please do so now. And while you're taking a look at that and deciding if you have anything you'd like to share, any questions, I am going to send out a couple of polls. Let's see.
Great, thanks, Brittany. So yeah, just as a reminder, you can put your questions right in that Q&A panel. And again, if you don't see that, you can move your mouse to the top of the screen and you can click the Q&A button to bring that up. You might even have to click the little drop-down options button to find the Q&A panel button. So yeah, go ahead and put your questions in there and we'll hang out and answer them here.
Okay, well, while you're thinking and typing, I'm going to go ahead and, I lost my poll box here. Well, I lost my polls. I don't know what I did with them.
If you want to, you could also stop the screen sharing, and then you'd see the polls there on the right side.
Let's see. Okay, I have just opened a poll. Has it popped up on your screen? I see some people are taking it. Excellent. So basically, there are a couple of questions that I have for you. I'd like to know what your discipline is because I'm interested, quite frankly, in seeing where you're coming from, and in the future, if you would like some discipline-specific library-type training sessions, I would love to do them. So this might help with that. Then I mentioned that NoodleTools Express tool, and I'm really interested in getting something like that for CCCO, but not the Express version, the paid version. You can create bibliographies, you can create note cards, you can write papers, things like that. And I'm interested to know whether or not you would be willing to allow your students to use something like that. I know it's kind of a hot topic. Some people think that students should create citations from scratch, and others think that as long as they can do a citation, doesn't matter. So that's what I'm interested in hearing about. And then also, if there's anything else that you would like from me as far as like webinars or training sessions for you or for your students, I would love to know because I'd love to do them for you. I'm going to go back here. Okay, I see there's a couple of questions. So Allison says, for now, if an instructor finds a student just isn't getting it and continues to unintentionally plagiarize, would you mind if the instructor refers the student to you? Not at all. I would be happy to help with that. Whether or not that is working with the student to show them how to do in-text citations, show them how to create paraphrasing, show them how to quote, things like that, I'd be happy to do that. And then if it doesn't work from there, then, I'll work with the instructor and we can kind of come up with a different plan. All right, Robert says, thanks for the great feedback. In our English 101 courses, we've had a week where this librarian visited to go through some of these ideas with the students. Is there any chance that this might happen in the future as the students seem to gain from this? Yes. Robert, if you're referring to the embedded librarian where Mary, the previous librarian, would come in and answer discussion questions and things like that, we are trying to we're trying to get some assistance with some interns, master's degree library students who will be kind of moving forward with that embedded librarian tool, where they actually can be embedded in certain courses for the entire semester, and that can be an active board for the entire semester. The other option for getting kind of, I don't want to say through that, but interacting with the students in more of an immediate, before we get these interns in place, or master's degree students in place, I'm happy to do either an asynchronous or a synchronous/asynchronous hybrid type session for the students where I can work with you or I can work with a number of English instructors to kind of determine what kind of questions or what kind of presentation they'd like. If the students want to come in person, they can come in person, but I can also record it, send it out to you, and you can post it in the class. If there's a need for me to pop in and answer some questions in the discussion board, that's absolutely fine. Just shoot me an email so we can talk about kind of what you're expecting and what you're hoping for. So Liz says, I was surprised when my English 122 students didn't necessarily understand that one must also cite with pictures taken from the internet. I usually repeat, if it's not from your head, it should be cited. So wondering if there's a good resource that you could provide on citing graphics. Well, that NoodleTools Express is amazing when it comes to videos, Twitter, Pinterest, images, things like that, because the student can actually check and basically go through a process to where exactly they got that image, that video, etc. from, and then it shows them how to create that citation for that. However, there are a few pretty good citing image resources available, and I can send those out I'm making a list here of things to send out to everyone or to make available, and I can add that to that list. I will also add that to the list of tools that I should create. More webinars on citations. Yes, Judy, I'd be happy to create a research and citation webinar for the students. I know that when it comes to the the asynchronous and getting students to participate in something when they don't get points for it, it can be very difficult. So depending on what course you teach, something that I found pretty successful in the past is I got together with 4 or 5 psychology courses, all the same class but just different instructors. They kind of told me what they wanted. We did an asynchronous webinar, basically, where the students could come in person if they wanted to, and occasionally some did. The other ones had to watch the video, and then they had to respond about what they had learned in a discussion post. That way they were able to get credit for it, and basically they were kind of forced into participating in that webinar. But I'm happy to work with you to create something like that that would be helpful for you. You know, Mark, I actually have not used Turnitin very much. The institution that I teach for does not have it enabled. So I've taught there for, it's been my 5th semester, and it has never been once brought up to me as an instructor. And now I know that it is available here because I do know someone who's been using it, but I know that it's used very infrequently, to be honest with you, and I think that it should be used a little bit more than that. I think that, I know that it does like an originality report, which could be extremely helpful when you go through a paper. If you have a student turn in a draft using Turnitin, let's say the originality report shows that 70% of their paper is not original. That's a great teaching moment then to go back and say, well, you need to bring this number down to 10%, or you need to get these quotes out, you need to start paraphrasing, things like that. I'd be happy, I'd love to get a little bit more experience with Turnitin. So if you have any ideas on kind of how the library can help you help your students with Turnitin, please let me know, and I'd be very happy to do so. Emily, I think that's a great idea. The students could make up some missed points on an assignment if they attend a webinar. Yeah, you know, my last institution, like I said, they didn't really use Turnitin, but I did have a student who used one of those. It was a student worker in the library, which was almost even worse. But they used one of those websites where you literally just have to hit a button and it writes the entire assignment for you. And they turned it in an ethics class. Fortunately, she told us she was doing it, and so it was dealt with. But I think Turnitin is something that's highly underutilized, and I'm glad to see that you are using it, even if it's not a perfect tool.
Looks like Emily also had a suggestion that maybe students could attend webinars to make up points. Or did you see that one? You saw that one, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I'm happy to work with you. I know that, you know, sometimes the best times for the students are not exactly the best times for the instructor. I've had good luck in the past with doing those asynchronous sessions. It works really well when you've got 3 or 4 classes coming together and offering one at, let's say, 1 p.m. on Tuesday and one at 7 p.m. on Thursday. And then I've just gathered the participant list and had the students maybe answer a couple of questions throughout those, the assignments, so that the ones in person can actually be tracked as actively participating as well as you can in a webinar. And I'm happy to turn in those participant lists to you, or, you know, kind of whatever, however I can help you, you know, determine whether or not your students actually were participating, and that I'm happy to do so when we come to the webinar creations. Well, are there any other questions that you have for me? I'm going to give you my contact information here. You can, this is my email. I have a phone number, but I quite frankly can't remember it unless I'm actually looking at the phone. But I'm happy to either meet with you in person, talk to you on the phone, or email, and kind of figure out exactly what I can do to help your students. I know it's, easier in more of a traditional college setting when you can just send the student to the library. But, you know, I've offered to a different instructor who had a student who had difficulties with unintentional plagiarizing. You know, I told him that he could require the student to talk to me and to work with me, and that I would shoot him an email and let him know that she actually did. So, you know, I'm happy to help any way that I can.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this for us, Brittany. And thanks to everybody who came here to attend. We did record this session as well, so it'll be on our webinar archive shortly so that you can come back and view it at your own convenience, or if there are sections maybe that you even would want to send to students, you could do that too. It'll probably be about a week before we see that up, but it will be up there. And just like Brittany mentioned, feel free to email her with any other questions that you guys come up with. And yeah, thanks so much for attending, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.